Storytime. Noland the Liar. So in One Piece, right, there was a book called Noland the Liar, and it was written by somebody from, I believe, like it was one of the Blue Seas, you know, and this person, wrote the book, and it told of like actual accounts of a person that actually existed. Like that was like the truth of the story. This man named Mont Blanc Nolan, who went out to sea, um, said he had found a treasure or a place that was the city of gold. Told his king about it, and then he went out with the king. And then when he got there, the treasure wasn't there. It's like he had lied to the king of the kingdom. How dare you lie to your king about there being a city of gold when there's no city of gold? Like, what the fuck? And like that's like the whole like you're a liar. You die for lying. Because that's what happened to Nolan the liar. He got executed for it, and it said it in the story, that he was a liar because he said there was a city of gold and there wasn't a city of gold there. You know, and that's how that story went. And like people like believed this shit in One Piece world for a long time. You know, only Mont Blanc descendants knew, certain ones, knew and believed that their ancestor wasn't like that. He wasn't a liar. He actually did know of a city of gold. As Jaya is a place that looked different in the past. It had been a fuller island, but like in modern days, and even when you know certain things happen, because I'm going to tell you what actually happened too. Like that's what the story said. The book called um, Nolan the Liar. And that's what it said. He lied about there being a city of gold. He took his king to the city of gold, and it was like, or where it was supposed to be, and it wasn't there no more. And he got his head chopped off, and like that part was true. But he wasn't a liar. He did find the city of gold. Mont Blanc Cricket, his descendant, you know, searched for like a long time to find the city of gold. He even took scuba gear and went down to the bottom of the water to try to prove its existence was true. But he couldn't find too much. He found a little bit of like, signs of like ancient artifacts and ruins, but like it wasn't like anything like, oh, this is the city of gold. You know, not solid evidence like that, like definitive evidence. So eventually the Straw Hats get to him and they found the book, and like they recall hearing about it when they were kids. Like, yes, Nolan the Liar, was told to people to like let them know that, if you tell a lie, then you could, die for, being a liar, to scare kids from like keeping them from, telling lies, and you should always be truthful and everything else. Kind of like that is how the story was also written, but it's also written to, and it shamed the name of Mont Blanc, and Mont Blanc Cricket wanted to clear his family's name. It wasn't, a lie. My ancestor Nolan did find the city of gold. So when the tribes go to Skypiea, they find it actually, but it's not like that anymore. There's no gold because NL took the gold and he made Arc Maxim out of it. Now, um, the story of what actually happened was shown in like between like in that arc. After they were in Skypiea and Luffy was fighting for a while, but it showed like the flashback of Nolan and what actually happened. So Nolan was on an expedition and he got to the island. And upon arriving at the island, these people, were the Shandorians. They practiced certain, traditions that they had and, culture that they had there. Much like kind of Native American culture a little bit. But they got there and the people were about to sacrifice a girl, the chief Kagura's daughter. As they believed that doing that would like bring good harvest, it would like cure people of their diseases, and doing this every so often would do shit like that. Human sacrifice would do that. The oldest daughter of Kagura, and she was like, "This is on my fate. I have to do this. This is the customs and everything here." He's like, "This is crazy. This disease that's going around. I actually know of my doctors, and they can cure this. You don't have to kill your people. You know." that's not what we do in my kingdom, and you could actually, turn this shit around. We can help you grow the like cure and everything else, and you guys can change things around here a little bit. You know, Calgary was against it for a little bit, but then Mont Blanc was like out, and the that serpent thing, whatever the fuck it was called, was like revered as a god there. Because it was like a part of their like ecosystem, and then a long time they've been there, and they just like prayed to this thing to like not eat their people, but like it's also a god. He ended up killing it, and he was like, "You made me kill one of our gods, something we held sacred, Kagra, the leader of the Shandorians." And then Nolan was like, "Calm down. Wouldn't you want to see your daughter live? Wouldn't you want to see your people, not have to go through these rituals that aren't necessarily, they ain't necessary. It ain't necessary, Lester. They ain't necessary at all. We have something called medicine, and this medicine can help people out." He eventually, was like, "Okay, there's something to it, and I do love my daughter." He helped me see that this is like not necessarily needed, but we're still the Shandorian people and everything else. They shared drinks and they exchanged, they had fun together. Ideas from Noland's culture and ideas from the Shandorian culture, and they like became cool with each other. But then they, walked upon the city of gold, and the city of gold was there, and he was like, "This is our ancestors' place. There's a poneglyph here. We don't know what this means or what it says, but we keep, this shit, safe from like invaders and shit. But you were cool, and I'll let you see it. Um, but don't take any treasure from here." They took some treasure, and he was like, "Get out of here. You can't be here. I told you not to do that. You have to respect our place still. You're kind of like overstepping your bounds." But then he was like, "Nolan did save my daughter." And then there's people there that were like, "Nolan's not actually a bad guy." And he's like, "Yeah, he's kind of a cool guy. You know, I will be waiting for you, Nolan, to come back here." And he's like, "Yes, I'll come back, Kagura. I will come back." But then he went back to the kingdom he was from, and the king was like, "You claim there's a city of gold, take me to it." And he's like, "Yes, we'll, go on a second voyage to the same spot." However, during the time Nolan was gone, Kagura and his people got shot up into the sky, and they were in Skypiea at that point, because the knockup string does that to that island every so often, and it shot them up into the sky, and they were in Skypiea. They were like, "What happened?" Like the part of the island's gone, and they're in like the white sea. You know, they were like fighting against the Skypians for like years and years, like hundreds of years, to like defend their land from like their encroachment. And then when Nolan in the Blue Sea went back to said spot in the Grand Line, Jaya, he found that the spot where Shandora was and the City of Gold was gone. And he was like, "Well, this was here. It was here last time, and now it's gone. I don't know what to say. It's right here, but it's gone." Um, and then they took him back to the sea that he's from, where the kingdom was from, and they killed him. They killed the men that also served under him, that knew that Nolan wasn't lying. My captain's not lying. They killed his people, and then they killed him too. And then somebody like slandered his name, wrote it down as Mont Blanc Cricket's a liar. He told people that there was a city of gold. The king went there and there wasn't no city of gold, but there was. The thing was, Jara went, or the part that had Shandor on it, went shot up into the sky, and it was a part of Skypiea then. And then the Shandorians had their, problems too, as they were also at war, like I said, with the Skypians, because the Skypians, saw a new group of people that weren't there. We'll take this land for ourselves, and they were fighting against the Skypians for a while. Then Enel eventually came years later and took over. And then Luffy, once Luffy came, it flashes to Luffy, and Luffy's fighting against Enel, right? And, he ended up defeating Enel and hitting the Golden Bell in the Golden Belfry rung. And that's how Mont Blanc Cricket knew that Luffy had found the City of Gold and that it was there. And the Shandorians were still alive, and there was, evidence of his, grandfather, or not grandfather, but his ancestor, Noland, not being a liar. You know, that shit exists and they're still there. You know, the golden bell is still there too. But, you know, it's just, something that, people like to slur words and shit, Some things, they don't go away. They just change places. People, hear some things and then like put too much into it. Then they're like, oh, you said there was something here when there's nothing here. That might be the case when you go there, but then you don't also have to like discredit the guy when everybody else knows, like, because they killed Nolan's men too. That's how you know they were trying to paint his family as bad, you know. But he was able to give Mont Blanc Cricket that, satisfaction of, his ancestors weren't, or his ancestor wasn't wrong about, there being a city of gold there on Jai a long time ago. It just had shot up into the sky, up the knockup stream, and that was there. So the story of Nolan the Liar is, a false story told to children to, make them, not tell lies. But, not all stories are true. This story is actually fiction and not, um, it within the story of One Piece. And it's not a true story, Sometimes, they try to, play games and shit like in, real life. They try to slur words and other things, but you gotta like search for the truth. And that's what, One Piece makes One Piece cool. People who search for the truth and, they don't just take shit at face value and stuff, I like shit like that. That's why, I want you guys to watch One Piece. This was a part of the, Skypiea arc, Mont Blanc Nolan's story, and, the Nolan the Liar, it had its meaning in that arc, and it was, powerful. Those guys, really, changed shit, and then when Luffy did that in the current timeline, the Shandorian people were freed from NL, and then like the Skypeans, I don't know if their like relations got better, but they probably did because Luffy got the antagonist NL out of the way, and now the Shandorians could then work with Gonfall to like, let bygones be bygones between the Shandorians and the Skypeans too, because that's another part of the story that was never told, because the Shandorians were not blue sea dwellers, or well, they were, but then they became sky people because the island got shot up into the sky, and then they were fighting against the Skypeans for like all that time. And they were trying to have good relations with Gonfall and other things, but Wiper was kind of young, and like man, we need our land back now. We don't need to talk with you. This is our land. You don't have no fucking rights to it. We should already have our land back by now. And they were coming to those agreements, but then Nell came in and like messed that all up. Then he took all the gold and, used to create Arc Maxim. But like after Luffy defeated him, things went, relations between them, I would assume, went better. And, Luffy kind of has that ability to do shit like that. And then there was, talks with, Sun God Nika, and on that, golden, wall. But not just that, but Gold Roger's message was left there, on Skypiea. Skypiea is a, great arc, One Piece. You gotta watch it, figure that shit out, if you like it or not. Skypiea might not be the spot where you end up liking One Piece, but for me, Skypiea wasn't one of the worst arcs. It was, needed and everything else. I just wanted to talk to you about that Nolan the Liar shit because, in real life that happens too. People like slur words and shit. If they weren't there at the right time, they don't know what happened. They, only see what they want to see, and, try to discredit people when like they've actually been there. Just because that happens doesn't mean that it wasn't true. and then like sometimes it can spiral into a thing where it fucks with generations of people, and then they're like, that family is like that because of that. You know, you know. It's all right to question things. That's all I'm saying. But be cool on the corner and watch One Piece. Sky PR was actually interesting. You know, watch it, like it, be cool on the corner.